the first presentation, which is drafting qualitative research abstracts, and will be taken by Professor Wright. So please, Professor Wright, I will be stopping. I'll stop sharing now so that you can share your screen. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Oladimeji. I am trying to share my screen right now. So just give me a second, please. So is my screen visible to everybody?
Yes, visible.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Thank you again, Oladimeji, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar series on abstract writing, which will be coming up in 2 parts. As we've been told today, we'll be speaking on how to draft and develop quantitative and qualitative abstracts. So I will be speaking on the quantitative component. So we'll just go straight into the presentation. I hope you can still see my screen. Yes, I think so. Okay, great. We all know that in today's world, where there's so much information, the volume of text and information available to all of us on a daily basis is just huge and humongous. It's huge, it's humongous with so little time. And so the ability to be able to can we please mute if we're not speaking? Thank you. So the ability to be able to summarize and succinctly provide an overview of a scientific paper or research paper is a most valuable skill in the scientific community. A few questions pop. What exactly is an abstract? What is the purpose of writing abstracts in research or in scientific papers? How do we go about the process of writing a scientific abstract? What are the potential sources? And where exactly can we find scientific abstracts? In very simple terms, an abstract can be described as an overview or summary of a scientific paper or research that's intended to provide researchers and other scientists a general understanding of a particular study of interest, of course, touching on the implications of the research without having to read an entire paper or an entire article. And the purpose of abstracts generally in any paper is to be able to quickly, quickly is the word, and accurately summarize the contents of the paper so that the reader knows exactly what the study is all about. So where does one find these abstracts? Typically, you find abstracts in journals, you can find them in print form, you can find them in electronic form, in all sorts of libraries, electronic libraries, physical library, and all of that. You can also find abstracts in research database.
Hello, Professor Wright, you're muted. You're muted, Ma.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes,
we lost you.
Okay, great. Thank
you.
Yes. For that. I don't know what happened. So as I was saying, I don't know did you see my first slide? Did you hear when I talked about what an abstract is? Did you hear all that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're saying we're answering all of these questions. What exactly is an abstract? What is the purpose of writing abstracts? And I said that in very simple terms, an abstract can be described as an overview or a summary of a scientific paper or research that's intended to provide researchers, other scientists, a general understanding of a particular study of interest. And then what do you want to do? You want to be able to have a feel of what the work is all about without having to read an entire paper. So the purpose of an abstract is to be able to quickly and accurately summarize all of those contents so that the reader knows exactly what the study is all about. So where do we find abstracts? We find abstracts in scientific journals, which could be electronic. You could find in print, as print rather, in libraries. You could also find in research databases, you know. Therefore, these sources are absolutely important sources of information, you know, on abstracts for the global community. A scientific abstract, for instance, should be written after the body of the paper has been written. And even though it's usually the first thing you see in an article, it's usually the last aspect that is written after the work has been completed. So basically, the scientific abstracts generally often includes just one or two sentences on each section of one's research. We're going to now look at the purpose of abstracts. Purpose of abstracts. Apart from deciding if you want to read an entire article or not, you know, readers generally use abstracts to find a way to kind of like measure how technically sound an abstract is, or the level of sophistication of a report or an article. So if the abstract is too simple, or if it is too technical, readers will generally, you know, be able to know whether the article will be valuable or whether it will not be valuable to them. In addition, sometimes you have situations or circumstances where many project supervisors do not have time because of their very busy schedule. And so they often have to rely on reading abstracts, you know, simple abstracts, simple executive summaries, so that they remain up to date on technical developments that are related to some of these subjects. And so in trying to supervise the dissertation of their students, they tend to always just quickly scan through some abstracts from here and there so that they're able to provide adequate supervision and guidance to their students. And of course, in the context of conferences or journal editing, for journal editors and conference organizers, for instance, abstracts are useful in deciding whether you want to proceed to the stage of review. So abstracts are submitted, and the next phase is either to reject outright because it's poorly written, or you want to accept or move it to the next phase, which is to have it reviewed, and then you decide whether it's going to be accepted or not. Again, even after reading an entire text, you know, readers sometimes store some of these abstracts and you put it somewhere, put it aside because you can use it later for other components of your work. I mean, for example, if you want to begin to draft your discussion, you want to come up with your list of bibliography and references and all that, you know, it's usually useful to store those abstracts somewhere and then you have access to them as and at when due. As I said before, today, with the bulk of, you know, easily accessible online indexes and lots of virtual libraries, scientists and researchers can basically just quickly, very quickly, you know, scan through several databases. And there are a few examples, as you can see on the screen. We have Google Scholar, we have Web of Science, we have Scopus, we have PubMed, and a few other potential search engines. So all you just need to do when you're interested in anything related to a subject and you want to quickly just look through an abstract, you just put your title in the search engine in some of these places and you have access to all of that information. As a matter of fact, abstract-based cross-referencing can even help you, you know, to identify things that you didn't know about. So for instance, maybe initially your plan was to just go look at depression amongst the youths. By the time you run through some of these databases, it can actually open a vista for further research. So as I said, you're looking for something related to depression in youths, but by the time you're done with your write-up, you now have the opportunity to add another dimension to your work. And then you can add things like, say, suicidal thoughts amongst the youth and things like that. Now let's backtrack very quickly. Why do we actually conduct research? We want to ask ourselves a few questions. Of course, you want to make the world a better place. You want to add to the body of knowledge. You want to challenge conventional thinking. And you also want to be able to find solutions to real life problems. Of course, for us in healthcare systems, we want to be able to strengthen our healthcare systems. And the ultimate goal, basically, is to be able to improve the health of people. So there are two broad categories of abstracts. You could have what we refer to as descriptive abstracts, and you could have what we refer to as informative abstracts. For the descriptive, we're basically talking about work that's been done. So it is written up, an abstract is written up from research that has been conducted. For example, say you want to look at the causes, you want to look at the consequences of, say, dating violence in urban slums in Lagos. You've done the work, and so you want to basically describe exactly what you did. Now, for the informative abstracts, on the other hand, you could present an abstract on a technical approach that you used, for a specific project. Maybe you want to say, inform people or organizations of a project that you're implementing. Maybe you have actually gone ahead to conduct the pilot phase of the project. And so you want to write up an abstract and present your work and present your findings, detailing the challenges that you encountered in the course of the work. Whichever type of abstract you choose to submit, please, before you write an abstract, you must read through your work very, very carefully. And then you underline the key points and the information, that's emerged from the work that you have done, because all of these are the things that you will require to draft the abstract. Of course, in writing your abstracts, there must be a seamless flow. There must be a logical sequence in the way you write your work. And the reason is simple. You want to make it easy for your target audience to be able to have a fair understanding of exactly what you've done. And so for any abstract to be impactful, it must be easily understood to as many people as possible. Now we're going to look at abstracts we're looking at quantitative abstracts, as I said before. And abstracts basically are usually broken down into 4 main sections. You have the background or introduction of the research, which usually constitutes just about, say, 1 to 2 statements. You have the methods section, which also constitutes just about, say, 3 to 4 statements. And then you have the results section, and then you have the conclusion. Now, the main difference between structured and unstructured abstract is that in a structured abstract, there are explicit headings, and the headings are the 4 things that I mentioned before: the background, the methods, the results, and of course the conclusion. On the other hand, when we talk about unstructured abstract, I'm going to show you some examples towards the end of the presentation. For unstructured abstracts, we're looking at a situation where the sentences basically just flow into one another. They basically flow into one another. Of course, we know when something is structured, it is easy to have a better understanding as opposed to when it is unstructured, when you now need to take more time to look in, to locate the relevant information that you're looking for. Now, what do we do when we talk about planning to write an abstract for a conference? You must first and foremost review the call for abstracts. You must familiarize yourself with the call. You must ask yourself a few crucial questions. 1, do I have work that would be a good fit? Will my work be in line with the theme or the themes or sub-themes for this conference? Do I have sufficient time? Or is the deadline for submission of abstract tomorrow or 2 days' time? Do I have sufficient time for me to be able to put some good stuff together? How can I convey the quality and the impact of my research? These are crucial questions that you need to ask yourself. In addition, of course, you also need to read the guidelines very, very carefully. Read the guidelines and follow the instructions to the letter. Because, of course, when we talk about scoring of abstracts, your ability to follow instructions is crucial when we talk about, putting together something that's worthy, of being accepted. So read the guidelines, follow the instructions to the letter, pay attention to all details. For some calls, they could actually talk about some formatting instructions, say, oh, what is the font size? Oh, what is the font style? And things like that. In some cases, of course, they might not, lay emphasis on all of those things. But the most important thing, as I said, is for you to follow instructions and try to draw the attention of your assessor or anyone who's going to be reading your work as well. And then, of course, focus is crucial. The key message of your work must be evident. Again, you might also want to quickly determine if you're going to have your work presented as poster or presented as oral. Of course, in some situations or circumstances, that call is not yours to be made. So, but if you have that option, you decide very quickly and then you follow the rules and regulations as required. Deadline, very crucial. Word limit is another thing. Most times the word limit is somewhere between, say, 200 to 250. It could be more, it could be less, but on an average level, the word limit is usually somewhere between 200 to 250 words. So you have to think very carefully before you write up, so that whatever it is you're bringing to the fore is clear, is concise, and is of good quality. So what are the components? What is required in a quantitative abstract? Of course, your title, the author or list of authors and the affiliations. And then, of course, if necessary, you could put details of the presenting author. And then the body of the abstract will be all of those things that I mentioned when I talked about whether it is structured or unstructured. Keywords, very crucial. Keywords serve to assist those who will be reviewing, and it would help us to know the important aspects or concepts of your work. Usually, they say keywords should be somewhere between 6 to 10 words. They could be single words. In some circumstances, it is accepted to actually have double words, or in some exceptional cases, triple words are also accepted. So, title. The title, as I said, must be appropriate. It must be brief. It must be informative. It must be interesting. It must be short. It would actually even be helpful if your title, can incorporate the theme of the conference. And so this would give your readers some sense of the goal of what was done. What was done? How was it done? Is it possible to determine the study design actually through the title? I'll give an example. You could say you want to look at an assessment of wanted, mistimed, and unwanted pregnancies amongst adolescents in rural communities in Lagos, for instance. Or you might say you want to look at common health problems of young persons in a specific geographically defined area. Or you could say, I want to do a 10-year review on patterns of sexually transmitted infections amongst rape victims in a specific location. For the last thing I just mentioned, you can see clearly that that one is likely to be retrospective. You're likely to be able to know or ascertain or determine that usually for such things, the source of information could be from records. But basically, when you talk about the title, it should be no more than 25 words. No more than 25 words. Okay, I'm going to show you an example of something similar. So this is something that we presented a while back, predictors of uptake. So you can see the title there, and then you can now see the list of authors and then their affiliations. You can see that the first presenter is on the first author is underlined. In some cases, it's either you underline or you asterisk, because that person would likely be what? The presenting author, and then you now have a list of the other co-authors as well. So let's go straight to the background to the study. The background to the study. The background should begin with a sentence or two. Sentence or two which talk about, what is known about this work and what is not known about this subject matter. What is the aim of your study? Now, the plan is to try to get the attention of your reader. You want to stimulate their interest. You want to kind of like stoke their curiosity on the subject. And of course, stoking curiosity based on the relevance of your work and nothing more. And so what you're trying to do is to do what? To highlight pressing gaps that your study is trying to fill. You touch on the needs, you touch on the justification, talk on the gaps, and then, of course, your overall goal. What exactly are you bringing to the table? What is your research trying to better understand? What is the novelty in your work? Let me pause at this point in time and say, for instance, that there are 3 key pieces of information that must be clear from your research objective. You must clearly state the target population, what you intend to do, and then lastly, the outcome variable you're expected to find from the work that you are doing. And then, of course, in trying to come up with your research objectives, you're expected to use action verbs in describing your objective. Do you want to assess? Do you want to compare? Do you want to determine? Do you want to evaluate? Do you want to ascertain? All of those things are crucial when you talk about the background of the study. The next, of course, is the methods section. Now, this is the most scientific and objective aspect of your work. Even though it is the most important aspect, it should also be brief. And so you must just focus only on the key details. There's no need for data there and all that. It should enable your readers evaluate how well you were able to plan. We want to be able to know that the work that you have presented, the data that you're bringing to the fore is credible, is valid, you understand, is of good quality, and more importantly, that this work can be replicated if necessary. And of course, the design of your work should pop, it should come out. What kind of study have you done? Is it observational? Is it experimental? And so on and so forth. Those things should come out. Is it a cross-sectional design? Is it retrospective in nature? Or are you using some more sophisticated designs like, meta-analysis, systematic reviews, and things like that? Those things should be clearly detailed in your method section. Of course, the duration of your work should also be clearly stated. What tools did you use? Did you generate your own tool? Did you use a tool that had been previously validated? Did you come up with a questionnaire? Did you pre-test the questionnaire in a different community and things like that? So those things are important. Did you mine secondary data? Did you use data that somebody else had collected? Did you go back into the records to use somebody else's data? What software did you use for data analysis? And typically, of course, when you write, you must write in past tense and mostly in third person. That's usually most appropriate. A few words on the setting could also be valuable. Is it a facility-based study, or did you go into the community? Is it a community-based study? Is it a population-based study? All of these things are little things that should come up, that will add value to whatever it is you're presenting. Of course, your main outcome variable must be clearly stated. Your main outcome variable must be clearly stated. What ethical considerations did you put in place? Did you make sure you collected or you obtained ethical approval? Did you obtain permission from the necessary authorities, as the case may be? All of these things are salient information that should come in your methods section. So we go straight to the results. For the results, your initial 1 or 2 words should give us some summary information on the demographics of what you found. So of course, the entire results could just be, say, 3 to 5 sentences, but 1 or 2 statements on some important or salient demographic information. What's the average age? What's the mean age? What's the age range? What's the predominant educational attainment by your participants? And then you now dovetail straight and quickly into the main outcomes of the study. Because we're talking quantitative, of course, it's great. It will be great to have you present your results in numerical form. Present your results in numerical form. And for places where you need some further bivariate or multivariate analysis, you want to also tell us whether what you found was statistically significant or otherwise. It's always great also to include the p-values as presented with your data. And of course, if it is possible, beyond having point estimates, if it's possible, it would be great if you can also include some degree of uncertainty limits by putting in some confidence intervals. Say, we found that the prevalence of depression amongst the youth was 60%, and then confidence interval plus or minus 3.4 or something. So that gives you a range, and that improves on the quality of your results as well. So you focus, and then you give us the most important thing. Now, what are some of the patterns that you observe? Sometimes what you see is that people just focus only on the positives, but actually, sometimes you not just only tell us the positive findings, you could tell us some of the pertinent negatives as well. Is something going down? Is something going up? Do we have a trend that's going up? Do we have a trend that's going down? Some pertinent negatives as well will be important when we talk about the results section. I'm trying to rush. I'm sure I don't have too much time anymore. So basically, we're going to general tips now. We're rounding up. You want to be able to communicate what you've done effectively. And some general tips. We have some do's and don'ts. I'll just mention a few. You want to ensure that whatever you're writing in abbreviation is written in full the first time at the first mention, and then you now put it in abbreviation going forward. English, English, English. Correct English, correct syntax, correct spelling, very crucial. These are things you must focus on. There's nothing that puts off assessors than so much grammatical errors and blunders. So run your work through a spell checker of some sort, and also get a colleague of yours to run through your work so that they can help you identify errors there as well. Good abstracts, as they say, can be ruined by poor grammar. So please, writing style is crucial. Correct English is crucial as well. And as I said earlier, make sure you include some keywords for indexing purpose as well. Now, please know, distinguished audience, that a good writing style comes with practice. It is not easy. So the more you write, the easier it becomes. And of course, reading also helps you to improve on your own writing skills. So as I said, importantly, please make sure you pass your work through a colleague, a true friend, or not somebody that will just read and tell you all is well. Someone that will look through and is bold enough to tell you when you've committed a lot of grammatical errors, and then you can take it to the next level. The next thing is the don'ts. For the abstracts, we said that the word limit is somewhere between 200 to 250. So there's no place for tables, figures, long quotations, or even references. And as I said before, it's best to write in the third person. So don't say, I did this. I interviewed 7 people to see what they thought of. Shorten it and say 7 people were interviewed about the system. That's like writing in the third form. And of course, don't have extremely long sentences. Again, don't have one-line sentences. We went to Casablanca. There were 4 females, full stop. This thing was that, full stop. No, that's not the way to go. We don't want it too complex. At the same time, we don't want very short one-line sentences. Make your points, go straight to the point. And then don't make several points within the same sentence. Break it up. You can lump a few things together, but don't make it one overtly lengthy sentence. Break them up into chewable bits that makes it easy for your audience to be able to understand. I leave you with 1 or 2 examples. This is an example of an unstructured abstract. You can see the title, and then you can see that for the write-up, the sentences or the words essentially just flow into one another. The next here is an example of a structured abstract where you have clear-cut, subheadings. You have purpose, or the background, or the introduction. You have the methods, you have the results, and then of course you have the conclusion. So in summary, what are the qualities of a good abstract? It must be well developed. It must be well developed. You must follow the rules and regulations. You must follow the guidelines. You must place your write-up in such a chronological order that there is a seamless flow of understanding for even the most lay reader. So there must be a logical flow so that you ease the understanding of your audience. And typically, most times, you've done the research before. And so it's best to write in past tense, and mostly, as I said, in third person. Of course, the last thing is to ensure that your work is easily comprehensible, able to as many lay people as possible. That way you can say that your work is impactful. So I want to stop here, and these are a few references. Thank you.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much, Prof. That is highly informative. I said it earlier on, that when you're bringing the first dean, the first professor, the first dean, the first that, and who is also the first speaker for today, you must be rest assured that you're going to be getting a first-hand information concerning how to put abstracts together. Thank you so much, Prof, for those informative. And it is, I can affirm to it with just the word you said. You said a good abstract can be ruled by poor grammar, which is actually true. Thank you so much for that. We are going to be having time for question and answer immediately after the second presentations. And I also want to say that the recording of this session will also be shared to all participants. Before I call on the next speaker for today, I would just want to quickly introduce someone who we always call her Baba Adolescent. And I would just want to introduce someone whose research work, whose process is ranked first in the history of making sure that adolescent and young people have the rights, health, and choice for young people. Join me as I also welcome Professor Adeshegun Fatusin, who is the president of SAYPHIN. He's here with us. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. I don't know if you can just say hello before we call the next speaker. Hi, Prof. Okay, all right. So in the course of the presentation and maybe before we finish the session, Professor Fatusin will be giving us maybe just a vote of thanks or a remark after before the end of this session. So quickly, I want to call on the next second speaker. I just introduced her earlier on, Professor Adeshola Olumide will be taking us through drafting qualitative research abstract also, and she'll also be giving us some of this information that we need to put a highly, qualitative or quantitative abstracts together. Thank you so much, Ma, for joining us. You can unmute now.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to do this presentation. I think I should start by saying huge thanks to Professor Wright, who has made my job extremely easy by going over quite a lot of what it is I would be presenting. And so I'm hoping that we can do this together over the next few minutes, and hoping that it will also be somewhat interactive and that the network stays steady. All right, so talking about drafting qualitative research abstracts. So I'll be taking us through components, a brief introduction, components of a qualitative abstract, writing the qualitative abstract, and then I'll take us through some examples, and I'm hoping that we would be able to contribute, and I think kind of like highlight some of the important things that are inside the sample abstract that I'll be sharing with us. And I'll take us through some tips for writing a good qualitative abstract, and then I'll conclude. All right, so I know Professor Wright has done quite a bit of this, but just as a reminder, we know that qualitative research involves in-depth study of an issue to gain a better understanding of it. It's also a bit different from quantitative research, and we'll look at some of these differences as we move along. Qualitative research also seeks to understand a given research problem or topic from the perspectives of the local population it involves. And somebody will say, oh, that's exactly what quantitative research does as well. And then sometimes you have both quantitative and qualitative research together in the same study. That's called a mixed method approach. And when you do this, it's like harnessing the positives from both quantitative and qualitative research and bringing them together to make the overall research better. So looking at what we have, the cartoon we have on the screen, we can see quantitative methods and qualitative methods. So quantitative methods will typically look at numbers and counts, whereas qualitative methods typically look at quality. They want to describe things. And so for the quantitative one, we have only 1 in 30 people take the free ice cream. This is interesting. But for qualitative, you want to know what the people feel about the ice cream. What did they think when they saw free ice cream? In Nigeria, people will be a bit wary about some free things, especially when it comes to free food. I mean, so qualitative tries to really elicit the feelings of individuals, the thought processes that went into play before they took a particular decision. And so many times it generates tons and tons of data, which you need a lot of time to be able to put together so that you can tell a coherent story that an individual or an independent person can read and can make good sense of. So some things that quantitative methods would do for us, it helps us improve understanding of issues. Usually you have counts. Many times the study design is fixed, and so you have fixed the study design. You've decided on how you are going to go about your data collection early. Many times also for quantitative methods, you use large numbers. The instruments are usually structured. And many times the questions are closed-ended, although these days you do have some open-ended questions tossed in the questionnaire. And then the data is usually quantifiable. And Professor Wright referred to p-values, odds ratios, and the rest of that. That comes into play with quantitative research. For qualitative research, usually you have smaller numbers of participants. The study design is usually more flexible than for quantitative. Instruments are also more flexible. Your questions are usually open-ended, and your data can come in various forms, in forms of text, in form of pictures, in form of even videos. You can have your data that way. But the important thing to also note is that qualitative research has a method to it. It's not just going out to do lots of interviews and thinking you can write a simple story. No, there is a method to it, because whoever is reading the piece that you are presenting needs to be able to understand how you went about collecting this data in order to believe that your data is true, is valid, and they can actually believe the data that you are presenting. So there are different methods very quickly used to obtain qualitative research data. And so if you are thinking, is this data quantitative? Is this qualitative? How do I put it together? You can use things like, what kind of methods did you use to obtain your data? And so usually for qualitative data, you can do observations. Usually you do interviews. I'm sure most of us or all of us are familiar with focus group discussions. For individual interviews, you can have case studies, in-depth interviews, key informant interviews. You can also have repeated interviews with the same individual, which is a bit similar to longitudinal studies and quantitative research. And for this type, this could be like life history interviews, where you interview the same participants over a longer period of time and in a repeated fashion. You can also have compilation of notes or reports, things like diary reviews, reviews of newspaper reports, and then you can have pictures or you can have maps as your data for qualitative research. But then how then do you put all this together in an abstract that an independent person, like I said, can read and make sense of? And I'm hoping that as you go along in today's lecture, we'll learn some of the tricks and some of the tips for doing this well. Professor Wright has mentioned what an abstract is. And so very quickly, I would just say, usually you want to have the overall purpose of the study and the research problems, the basic design of the study. That's like usually the second paragraph, the major findings or the trends found as a result of your analysis, and then a brief summary of your interpretations, and then you want to conclude. We also know that an abstract should be crafted carefully. Professor Wright emphasized this, and I'm emphasizing it again. You need time to put an abstract together. And so usually an abstract is not something that you wake up on the morning that the abstract submission is going to close and start to put it together, except if you are a seasoned writer and you really understand the study you have done and most of the data is in your brain already. An abstract also should encompass the aim, scope of the study, the key problem and theory, depending on the number of words that you are allowed, the methods you use, the data set, key findings, limitations, and implications. This is the way Elsevier describes an abstract, and Elsevier is a very well-known publisher of a lot of scientific papers. Now, an abstract is based on properly conducted research or work. That is something that I think is an important takeaway. If the work hasn't been done well, it's going to be extremely difficult to put it together in an abstract. So there can be no shortcuts. You cannot ask Alexa to help you to put it together if you have not conducted good research. And so it's important for us to note that an abstract is based on properly conducted research or work. Otherwise, one might fall into the danger of fabricating methods or outrightly telling lies. And so it's important that we have done good science before we start to think of putting an abstract together. Now we have examples of qualitative abstracts on the screen. Since we're going to be sharing the recordings with you, you can take time out to read this and look for these. These are available freely online. And so I'll be taking us through the second one, which is From Fear to Resilience, Adolescents' Experiences of Violence in Inner City Johannesburg, South Africa, as a case study, as I walk us through preparing an abstract for a scientific conference based on qualitative data. So what are the things you want to see in a qualitative abstract? Similar to what you want to find in a quantitative abstract, you need a title, you need the names of the author and the authors and their affiliations. You need an introductory section. Sometimes it's called a background, depending on the conference or the person that is asking for this abstract. They might call it an introduction or a background. You need the method section, the results section, and also the conclusion. And so when you want to write a qualitative abstract, like I said earlier on, you have collected your data. You have obtained your data using various methods that are amenable to qualitative research. And so after collecting the information, you then want to organize the information. Unlike quantitative, usually with qualitative, you have a lot more information that you are looking at. You have a lot of transcripts that you're looking at. Depending on how many people you interviewed, how many focus group discussions you did, you would have a lot of transcripts. And each transcript can be from anywhere from 15 pages to 20, 25 pages long. And so you need time to read through all these abstracts to have a sense of what is the information in the abstracts, to have a sense of what are the main ideas, what are the themes. And you need time to organize this information. Now, the information can be organized manually or using appropriate software. Manually means you read through them, you highlight things, you use different colors of pens to try to bring out what is the story behind the information I have collected. If you're going to be using appropriate software, that's very good as well. Many times we are told that if you don't have so many abstracts, maybe you have so many transcripts, you have maybe 10 or 20, it's easy to go through this manually. But if you have a lot more, you are better off using appropriate software. And there are various types of software that are available these days. Common ones, Atlas TI, NVivo, Max QDA. Those are the ones that I can think of readily, but you have various types of software that you can use. And then you want to start to write. When writing, many times you can see the arrows here. Sometimes you do data collection, you organize the information, you see that there are some gaps, there's some questions you want to ask again. And it's like you can go back to the field and collect more information. Typically, you wouldn't do this for quantitative, but for qualitative, you are exploring. If you start seeing kind of like new trends coming up, these are things you want to explore immediately. And so you may need to go back and collect additional information. You may need to go back to your participants to clarify some of the things and some of the terms that they used. And so sometimes when you're collecting information, your participants might use terms that are kind of like common to them, which you really don't understand. And you want to know more information about that. So for instance, maybe I can use the term bad. Previously, bad is bad, worst. Bad is not good. But you can be interviewing young people and they say, oh, this was bad. And then the person that interviewed them did not explore to find out what did they mean by bad. And then you are saying that when this person said, oh, it was bad, the person is now describing this in very good and glowing terms. As a qualitative researcher, you would want to go back to this participant and ask, what did you mean when you said bad? Were you using bad in the English language context of bad, or were you using bad as part of language that is peculiar to a youth culture, or that is peculiar to a particular group of people? And so you are allowed to go back to your participants with qualitative research. In the same vein, you are seeing your findings and you want to be sure. So you can go back also to your participants and present your findings to them. That's like called a member check, so that you are sure that you are not taking their thoughts out of context. This is very important for qualitative research because typically you do not interview so many people. And so you want to be certain that your information is correct. You're not going to be doing chi-squares with them. You're not going to be doing logistic regression. So you are just left with what a participant said, and you want to be certain that you're not interpreting their thoughts based on your own biases. And so after organizing, you write, you can go back and organize some more. At the point of writing, you can go back and collect some more data. And so for qualitative, it's a little bit more fluid in the organization and in the write-up of your findings. So looking at the title and names, please, like Professor Wright has said, look at the instructions that have been given to you by the conference organizers or by the journal. What have they asked you to write? Do they want titles? Do they want abbreviations? Do they want names used in a particular order? Please look at this and use that to guide your writing. And looking at the introduction, apologies for the busy slide, but I'll be asking us some questions here. I hope you can find some of the answers in this background. So your background, you want your background to contain a brief statement about the problem or issue studied. Something that gives your readers some idea of the context in which your findings are situated. You also want the justification. Why was the study conducted? What gap in literature were the investigators hoping to fill? And so things like, is it that this work that you are doing, what you are presenting is going to advance knowledge? And so, for instance, we all have a sense that there is a lot of vaccine hesitancy when it comes to using COVID vaccines. Now, do you want to add to the body of knowledge? Is what you are doing a first step to a bigger study? Do you want to provide more current information? Because probably the last set of research works that were done were conducted 3 years ago. That should come out quite clearly in your background. And then you want to see the aim or the general objective. And so I would like to ask anyone in the room, from what we can see on the screen, can we identify what is the aim of, or what was the aim of this study? So we have the background here. Can anybody identify what was the aim? I don't know if I'm permitted to call people up.
Can I come in?
Yes, please.
Prof? Okay, I think the aim of this study was to determine how violence is experienced differently by adolescent boys and girls, and also how they conceptualize dangerous and safe spaces in their neighborhood. I think that was the aim.
All right, so fantastic. Thank you very much. Typically, you would find the general objective or the aim in the last sentence in the background. And so it's good for you to look there and look out for it. And so when you are putting your own abstracts together as well, let it be easy to find. The lady that answered the question probably has never seen this paper before, but because the authors had put it in a clear manner, in a concise way, it was easy for her at first glance to easily and quickly identify the objective. And so if you are preparing your abstracts, for instance, for a conference or for a journal, please ensure that your objective is easy to find, is easy to understand, and is easy to locate for the reviewers. They are making a call for abstracts as part of our conference, and people are going to be reviewing tons and tons of abstracts. The easier it is for them to be able to identify and see to identify and then to understand the objectives, the more likely you are to get maximum points for that section, and the more likely it is for your abstract at the end of the day to be accepted. Now, looking at the methods, many times people just think, like I said earlier on, that qualitative, just do a few interviews, do some focus group discussions and put it together just right. No, there has to be some methods to what you are doing. And so it's also important in qualitative research to clearly define who are your subjects and what sampling strategies were used to identify them. Who did you interview? Did you interview adolescent boys? Did you interview adolescent girls? Did you interview teachers? Did you interview parents? That needs to be clear in your methods section. Then also the method of data collection. How did you collect this data? Did you use focus group discussions? Did you do in-depth interviews? Did you do data walks? What exactly did you do? That also needs to come out in your method section. Then what types of data were collected, and from where or whom or by whom did you who exactly collected this data? Now, looking at your data analysis, you also want to know what approach was used to analyze this data. And then very important, it's you need to include something about the trustworthiness or the quality of your data and your analysis. Now, depending on how many words you have, you need to put as much of this information as possible in your 500-word abstract. It's a little more tricky when you are dealing with qualitative research because you have much more data that you are working with. But Professor Wright said something that is particularly important. Nobody was born in this world with all the skills to write abstracts. The more you write them, the more you practice, the more you expose your work to your peers to review, the better at it you get. And so please, if you're going to be submitting an abstract and would like to implore you all to submit abstracts to our conference, please start early and don't wait till the night before or even till a week before. Now, looking at what we have here, I don't know, do we have volunteers? So what I'll do to save our time is I'll quickly read what we have on the screen, and I'll ask some of our volunteers if they can identify who were the subjects, how was data collected, and what approach from the right up. And so we have here that the article draws on data collected in the formative phase of the well-being of adolescents in vulnerable environments study of challenges faced by adolescents growing up in impoverished parts of 5 cities. This article reports on analysis using only data from the Johannesburg site. Using both purposive and snowball sampling to select participants, we conducted in-depth interviews, N equals 20, and community mapping exercises with female, N equals 19, and male, N equals 20 adolescents living in Hillbrow, as well as key informant interviews with representatives of residential shelters, community-based organizations, and NGOs working with youth, N equals 17. Transcripts were coded manually and analyzed using an inductive thematic analysis approach. So there's tons of information in these methods, but it makes it easy for an independent person to understand what was done, and in fact, to actually make an attempt to replicate these methods for a similar or for another study. And so please, can somebody tell us who were the subjects that were interviewed? Who were the participants? Any volunteers? If you want to volunteer, you can unmute and pick any of the questions. So you are free to start with the easiest of the questions.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Adolescents were interviewed.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing in the chat box adolescents 15 to 19 years. So it's clear. In addition to adolescents, who else was interviewed?
Hello?
Hello?
Ma'am, can I answer?
Yes, please, you can.
Okay, representatives of residential shelters, community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations working with youth were equally interviewed.
Thank you very much. So we can see here that a range of participants were interviewed. Some benefits that one derives from interviewing a range of participants is that you have a more comprehensive picture. We all know the danger of a one-sided story. If you tell me to describe my father's house, I'll probably let you think that my father's house is a mansion, even much bigger than Aso Rock. But by the time you interview my neighbors, you interview my friends who have been to my dad's house, they will tell you, oh, no, it's not as big as all that. And so usually with qualitative research, you want to interview various participants relevant to your objectives so that you can have a complete and a comprehensive story that is believable. All right, thank you very much. So can anybody say, answer the question on how were the participants selected from, and this is from an abstract, not a full paper. How were the participants selected?
They can do that by raising up their hands so that we can call them.
Okay, thank you very much. How were the participants selected? Okay, I think some people are putting the answers in the chat box.
Yeah,
thank you very much, Joshua. Yes. Joshua, Olani, Halimas, and Usman, by purposive and snowballing sampling. And so if I, as a reviewer of this abstract, I'm reviewing and scoring, I can tick all the boxes and say, yes, participants clear. Yes, the method of selecting the participants is very clear. Looking also at the how was it analyzed? It is clear their transcripts were coded manually and analyzed using an inductive thematic analysis approach. I can tick yes as well. And so we see from here that if all this information is missing from an abstract, whoever has submitted that abstract is not going to get the tick, 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 and the scores. And that might kind of, at the end of the day, will ultimately reduce the overall scores. So it's important that we try to put this information into a method section. Sometimes some people might not use the exact terms and might try to describe. A lot of times too, when reviewers are looking at these things, sometimes they also try to be understanding and give scores, even though they might not see the exact terms being there. So please try and put as much information as possible in your method section. However, being mindful of the word counts that you also have. Now, the results, what do we want to see in the results? It should be an overview of important findings. Now, for someone who has spent maybe a year or 6 months, or if you are somebody who has done a PhD and you are presenting an abstract from your PhD, you probably have spent 3 to 4 years on this PhD. I can assure you, every single thing in your PhD book is important to you. But we as readers don't want to read your entire PhD book. We don't have the time. And so it's important that you distill the most important findings relevant to your title, relevant to the objectives of this particular abstract, and put them in the results section. Many times also, if you've done a big project, you have tons and tons of results. Please look at that big project. From the big project, try and bring out a title that is simple, that is catchy, and that covers what you want to present in your 500-word abstract, and ensure that everything is in line. And so the title, the objectives, the methods, the results, and the conclusion should all speak to one another. The title and the objectives in sync, your methods referring to the title and your objectives, your results in line with your objectives and your title. A common mistake that we make sometimes is that somebody would have said, for instance, that I'm trying to explore adolescents' perception about taking the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, I'm borrowing this title from one of my students who was thinking of doing that for her MPH work. And so I would like to acknowledge her here. And so you're looking at, somebody says, I'm looking at attitudes towards the COVID-19 vaccine among young people. That's the title. Then we start saying things about the history of COVID-19 in your abstract. It doesn't speak to the title. Fine, the history of COVID-19 is important. That can be in the larger paper. But for this title, for this abstract, the title, the objectives, the methods, the results, the conclusion, all of them linked. That is what would score you the maximum points. Now, another thing to note also in qualitative is that it's important to move towards interpretation rather than just simple presentation of themes. And so I'm sure some of us have looked at some qualitative papers, and the only thing we can see is just this gamut of quotes. Quotes. And you're like, how do all these speak to each other? What do they mean? And so it's important that even when we are doing qualitative research as well, we do some form of interpretation. The quantitative counterparts will be like you are doing your cross tabulations. So for instance, we are still talking about the issue about perceptions of young people about taking the COVID-19 vaccine. Do you think that boys and girls felt differently about taking the vaccine? That needs to come out in your results. Do you think that older boys compared with younger boys had differences? And so a bit of interpretation is also important, even in qualitative. Even though you're not going to be presenting p-values, you're not going to be presenting percentages in that sense, you're not going to be doing chi-squared, but we need to have a sense of who are the people that we need to target with interventions if we need interventions. And so those kinds of findings come when you're trying to interpret your findings in your results in qualitative research. And so also looking at this same abstract, this same example I have here, the result says here that both boys and girls reported high exposure to witnessing violence and crimes. The author is trying to tell us that it wasn't just, this finding was not just limited to boys or to girls. And then they now went on to describe that for girls, the threats that they felt was different from that of the boys. And so we have for girls, the threat of sexual harassment and violence was pervasive. While boys feared local gangs, the threat of physical violence and being drawn into substance abuse. So here we can see, yes, this is qualitative work, but we're beginning to understand that the way girls describe witnessing violence compared with the way boys witness the boys' experiences are different. And so if, for instance, I'm a programmer and I want to put together an intervention, I know that for the girls, I'm going to be dealing more with things like sexual harassment and violence. For boys, I'm going to be thinking more about substance abuse. Now, going further down, we have home was largely a safe haven for boys, whereas for girls, it was often a space of sexual violence, abuse, and neglect. We can see the comparison here. We can see the cross-case analysis. We are comparing boys and girls. How did boys perceive home? How did girls perceive home? And so really, going back to, if I am a programmer and I want to do something on sexual violence for boys and for girls, I would immediately understand that for girls, the home may not actually be safe. I may need to find a safer space for them compared with the boys. So going further down, you have some adolescents develop coping mechanisms, such as actively seeking out community theaters, churches, and other places of sanctuary for violence. Community-based services and shelters that support adolescents reported a lack of resources, overall instability, and difficulties networking effectively. Now, a lot of information here, but the information, if you remember the title, feeds back to the title and is concise. It is easy to read. It's easy for us to understand. Many times also with qualitative, we have quotes, and we like to use quotes to support our results. Depending on how much, on what the word count is like, you might be able to insert one catchy quote and relevant or two. But if you don't have so much luxury of word count, please, you can leave the quotes to your main presentation. The thing is, you want this abstract to be as self-explanatory as possible so that it can be accepted, and then you can have all the time, or well, more time to present your findings. So if you have enough word count and you have enough space, You can't put in a quote. If you don't, you can just limit yourself to describing and comparing the findings that you have. So the conclusion is a summary of key findings and also recommendations. What did you find generally, and what are your recommendations? And so from this paper, we see that the conclusion was that adolescents in Hillsborough commonly witnessed and had direct experiences of many forms of violence in their environment, and these experiences differed markedly by gender. If I ask us now, do we think these experiences differed markedly by gender? I'm sure we would say yes, because for one, we found out that the things that were pervasive to females were different for the males, and the places that males thought were safe were not necessarily safe for females. Everything feeding back to the title, the objectives, the methods, and also the results. And so here we have that as the recommendation, that interventions that build young people's social capital and resilience are essential for reducing violence-related trauma and long-term health and social consequences for adolescents in this community. Professor Wright had talked about keywords. And so the keywords here, you have adolescents, violence, inner city, gender, low income, South Africa, Johannesburg. Some people don't want to put in the country. Some people do want to put in the country there. And so it depends. But you can see the keywords. And looking at the keywords, we can tick off the boxes and see that really these keywords actually came from this data that we have just reviewed. So very quickly, tips for writing a good qualitative abstract. Some of these Professor Wright has mentioned, and so I won't be going over them, or I'll just mention them very briefly. So to read the instructions, give adequate time to data analysis, go back to the proposal if need be, what theories underpin the study. And so sometimes you might need to go back to the original proposal that you wrote before you did this study. So you can have an idea of what were the theories that underpin the study. Depending on the number of words you have, some people will give you 1,000 words for a pretty long abstract. You might have space to put the theories. If you are dealing with 500 words, most unlikely that you will have space to include your theories. It's also important, a lot of us learn by reading and seeing what other people have done. So look for examples of abstracts from well-known journals or conference proceedings. Go and look at the journal, the abstracts that were accepted. Abstracts in very good journals, good quality journals, and read them. And that would also help you to be better at writing your own abstracts. Then also read through guidelines. There are guidelines for writing qualitative research abstracts and qualitative research papers. For instance, you have the RATS guideline and the COREC guidelines. RATS just looks at relevance, appropriateness of methods, transparency of methods, soundness of interpretative approach, whereas COREC is consolidated criteria for reporting qualitative research. These guidelines are freely available online. You can download them and use them when you are preparing your own abstracts. Very, very important, like Professor Wright had also mentioned, ask your peers, ask your good peers, not the peers that are always giving you glowing feedback. Ask those that also give you very critical feedback. Ask them to review it. Gone are the days when you write an abstract and you cover it up. Oh, nobody must know I'm writing an abstract. I must be the only one to write it. I must be the only one to submit. No, please give it to your peers to review. Give it to your supervisors to review. Give it to people that you know are very good at writing qualitative data to review. And when they review, don't feel bad if they punch lots and lots of holes into it. Just revise it as required and submit. You know your goal. Your goal is to write a good abstract. Your goal is to get your abstract accepted. And so in conclusion, an abstract is a well-written summary of a research or a project. It should contain enough information to be very well understood by the reader. And you must give adequate time to writing it. Otherwise, you would have an abstract that is pretty difficult to understand and might not get accepted at the end of the day. Thank you very much. And so look forward to the questions and receiving questions and comments from you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Adeshola. That's highly informative, very, very informative. So I'll just, I know majority of our participants have one or two questions to ask. Then I'll just hand over to Dr. Adeyemi. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Olumide, and thank you very much, Professor Wright, for the exhaustive presentation. It was very enlightening. Unfortunately, we did not have enough time to go above and beyond, but I guess with what was presented, and since the recording and the presentations will also be shared, our participants will be able to go through the slides at their own time and also try to unpack all that has been shared today. However, we have like 15 minutes for questions and answers. So if you have burning questions, you can please, to make it faster, you can please type them out in the chat. If it's directed at anybody in particular, you can also notify the resource person that is to answer the question. I'll go through some of the questions that have already come in previously. Quite a number of people seem to be interested in the mixed method. That's when you have like both qualitative and quantitative components and how that can be reported. So we have a question that goes from Olaniyo Halimat, and the question says, if one is writing an abstract on a larger study that used the mixed method, but the abstract result is focused on qualitative results, do you need to state the methodology as mixed method? I think that will go to Professor Olumide. I'm not sure if you got that. Should I read it again or it's okay?
It's okay. So I got the question. Thank you. So I would say that you write that it was a mixed method. However, this abstract focuses on the qualitative aspects of the project. And so you should say that, yes, it was mixed methods, but emphasize the fact that your abstract is based on the qualitative findings. You also need to be very good when it comes to summarizing, because you have like 500 words to put all that information in.
All right, thank you very much, Ma. This question goes to Professor Wright, and it says that from your presentation, you mentioned something about the third person. So this person would like to know that do we still write in third person for the abstract of a proposal? So they just want a yes or no answer, Ma.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adeyemi, and thank you for that question. Yes, you write in third person, but of course you write futuristically. For example, you probably want to say, this research will be conducted in two urban communities in Lagos in 3 phases. In the first phase, a desk review will be conducted. So you're writing futuristically because it's what you plan to do, but you're still writing in the third person. I also want to add 1 or 2 things to what Professor Olumide just said. The truth is actually in some cases, yes, we talked about word limits and all that. You could actually have a mixed methods approach, and you could actually provide information on a little bit of the quantitative aspect and a little bit of the qualitative aspect. But like she said, you need a lot of skills in trying to, summarize all of that information, bearing in mind that we said that, for instance, for the results section, you should be looking at, say, 3 to 5 sentences. But in some conferences, they can actually ask for an abstract that could be as long as 350. So if it's a mixed methods research that you conducted and you want information on all of that to be clear, as I said in my initial presentation, your outcomes should, they should pop, they should come out. So your outcome variable for the quantitative component and outcome variable for the qualitative. So you can summarize all of that and actually make that presentation in a shortened abstract. But as I said, it requires lots of skills so that you don't miss out on salient information that will improve your chances of having your abstract.
All right, thank you very much, Ma, for that answer to the question. Juliet Alabra, I see your hand, I acknowledge it. However, would really appreciate if you could type your question in the chat, except it's a very burning question that you need to actually speak to. Well, please type in the chat, and if we do not understand, then we'll call on you to unmute and ask your question. Thank you for understanding. To move along, we have a question from Ogungweson. And he says, I would as well want Professor Olumide to run through method of analysis for qualitative study. I think that's beyond the scope of our webinar. However, let's maybe Professor Olumide might just have one sentence or 2, or maybe how to report how the analysis was done when writing the abstracts. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. So the methods of analyzing your qualitative data will actually depend on your initial project title, your objectives, and the types of information that you collected. Some common methods of analyzing qualitative data: content analysis, thematic analysis, grounded theory, constant comparison. So you have various methods of analyzing. And if you put your email address in the chat box. I think the organizers can get back to me, and I will send you a couple of publications I have on how you can analyze your qualitative data for various methods. A lot of people do content analysis, a lot of people do thematic analysis, but there are different other types of analysis you can do. Keywords in context, various types that you can do.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma. A continuation of that question from the same person also says that should the methods and procedures of the qualitative study be part of the method section in the abstract? So it says, should the methods and procedures, that maybe how they went about doing the qualitative study, should it be included in the abstract?
So I'm not very sure now what you mean by the methods. Typically, you would have conducted interviews. So you mentioned that you conducted interviews. You would have selected participants. So we had said you need to mention how you selected your participants. Was it purposive? Was it snowballing? Or how exactly did you select them? So it's important for you to just mention that. One sentence is fine. And so that is part of the way you went about your work. And so it should be in the method section.
Okay, and thank you very much, Ma. I think this question will go to Professor Wright, and it's from Usman Suleiman, and the question goes thus: can we use paraphrasing software, that's AI in brackets, artificial intelligence, like Quillbot, to generate our abstract? Is it ethical?
That's a very interesting question. I'm not conversant with the use of those apps. So I would rather, I'm used to the regular ways of doing things, drafting based on what you've done and passing it, as I said, through having some peer review as well. You understand? I'm not too sure about the use of, my question would be, or my concern will be, I hope that certain salient information would not be lost. One, two, I'm not sure how it works really. So maybe I shouldn't, I'm not the best person to answer that kind of question. I'm used to the typical regular way of looking through what you did and taking out a bit of all that you've done and, piecing all of that together to form a full abstract. I'm not quite conversant with the use of such apps. Over. Quillbots would correct the grammar. That's okay.
So that's what I think it would do. I don't know if it would.
Is it a spell checker? Is it a spell checker, or what exactly is it? What does it do?
That's my opinion about it. That it's like Grammarly, but you need to have that. But maybe the person has used it for some other thing. But my question is, if you haven't fed your data into that software, how is it going to churn it out for you? So I don't know. I have not used it before either.
Okay, it says paraphrasing tool. Okay, I think you're right, Professor Olumide. Yes, it looks like that's more for ensuring that issues around syntax and grammar are properly done. And then it probably helps you to possibly reduce the number of words so that you can fill all that you've done into the required word count. But as I said before, you still need to, you're the one who did the work. I mean, I'm not sure the software will be able to tell us that, oh, you did this and you did that. So you need a little bit of information on the different components of the abstract, put it in. And then if you're having challenges around maybe the word count, for instance, that could guide you and help you to shrink the sentences in such a way that the meaning isn't lost. I also see something on Turnitin. Turnitin is also a plagiarism checker alongside several others online. So you don't want to go and lift information from somebody else's work. And so Turnitin, yes, would help you ensure that you are ethically fine and that you haven't repeated words that have been published before. So those things are crucial as well, especially for larger aspects of the work beyond even just the abstract. Turnitin would help you to make sure that you reduce to the very minimum the amount of plagiarism, if at all, if you've gone that route. But of course, we know that plagiarism is something we should not do in any way. So over.
All right, thank you very much, Ma. And thank you very much, Professor Olumide. I see that you're already answering some of the questions in the chat box. So let's all of us kindly read through the chat box. But for the benefit of those that might have missed some of those questions, that might still benefit from it, I'll just take some of them that have already been answered. Adenike Adeoye says, thank you for your presentation. Okay, no, somebody else asked, under abstract section, do you still need to state limitation? And then a response from Professor Olumide has already been given and says that you don't need to include the limitations in the abstract. However, if the journal or conference organizer specifically requests for limitations, you can include. So some of these other extra things, they are also based on the requirements by either the journal or the scientific conference that you're presenting at. And then, okay, Juliet has asked her questions, but I'm very sure that Professor Wright and Professor Olumide would actually read through and then give any answers they might have in the chat box. I would like my co-moderator to also please look through the chat box in case there's any question we might have missed so that we can bring it to the fore. And then if anybody else has a burning question and you just think you need to express yourself, then you can now do so with the raise of hand. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think we have Jane. Jane is asking, please, can an abstract be written before carrying out the main research? If yes, how do you generate the results that is presented in the abstract?
So yes, an abstract can be generated at the next outing that we're having. So please make sure you're all here on the 27th. Professor Upong will be speaking on project-based research. So for instance, somebody mentioned that if you want to present an abstract for a proposal, obviously for the proposal, you really haven't done the work. You haven't conducted, you haven't collected data. So you can provide some information, preliminary information. And so the aspects around results will not feature. You're going to give us a little bit of information on the background, introduction, and then your plans, and things like that. So you might not have a results section because clearly you haven't conducted the work, but it is providing some information on what you intend to do, the implications of what you intend to do, and all of that. And so most likely the methodology section will be more robust, giving you the opportunity, because you don't have any results. The materials and methods section, the method section would be more robust, providing a whole lot more information to cover up for the fact that you don't have any results yet, but you could also provide information on the implications of some of implications of the work that you are doing, the importance, the rationale, the justification, and all of that. And then you go to town on the method section. And then your plans, maybe your plans for what you intend to do. Even when you do conduct the research, how do you intend to, for example, if we're talking about the mixed methods approach, for instance, this is where you have the opportunity to say, oh, we're going to have two components. We would do a review of records. We will use tools to talk to. We have different stakeholders. We would be using a tool, a questionnaire, to obtain or collect data on this and that and that. And then we would be conducting we will conduct some focus group discussions. We conduct some in-depth interviews and things like that. And then the plan is to do some analysis using some specific softwares for quantitative. You could talk about use of SPSS. You could talk about use of Stata. You could say, and for the qualitative dimension, you would use, you just pretty much either do content analysis, or you want to use NVivo and all of that. So you have more opportunity to expatiate on the method section because you don't have information on the results. Over.
Okay, thank you so much, man. Thank you. And I see that Professor Lumide already answered some of the questions in the chat box. And I also want to say that again, that the recording will be shared to all participants. We know that we have like 100 participants, and a lot of people are struggling to join at the time. So we'll be sharing the recording. So I'll just hand over to Dr. Adeyemi to continue. Over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Oladimeji. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time, your patience. We want to thank our resource persons once again. There's a question which would be directed to one of the organizers of the conference when he comes to give his vote of thanks. And the question goes thus: is literature review accepted by the organizers? That's so I'm sure we're all aware about the call for abstracts, which is currently ongoing. It started in March, and for now, the deadline is on the 31st of May. So Dr. Adebayo will be speaking more on that, on the call for abstracts, because after listening to these sessions right now, I'm sure some of us know that we already have abstracts that we want to submit. I want to rejig them and make them quality abstracts I want to submit towards the conference taking place in August. So Dr. Adebayo will be talking more on that. And so he would answer that question if literature reviews are also accepted as, if the abstract of literature reviews will be accepted as well. And then, okay, so I think that's about all that we have now, all the questions now. We promised to keep this under 1 hour, 30 minutes. So we want to live up to our promise. I think we're still in good time. So yes, we need to round this up. And at this point in time, I'd like to call upon Dr. Adebayo to give us more information on the upcoming conference, the call for abstracts, and then the final vote of thanks, and to also thank our speakers. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Oladimeji. Thank you, resource persons. Over to you, Dr. Adebayo.
All right, thank you, Dr. Adeyemi, for a good job. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ayodeji Adebayo, a member of the scientific subcommittee. Let me say that this webinar has been put together by the scientific committee of SAYPHIN in view of the upcoming conference in August. And the chair of the committee is one of the erudite presenters, Professor Ololade Wright. Thank you very much for a great job. You all agree with us that it's been an engaging afternoon. Apologies, I won't be able to put a face to my voice because I'm using a handheld device. Then, you know, the purpose of this is to be able to improve the quality of abstract we'll be submitting for the upcoming conference in August. And we sincerely hope that what we have learned this afternoon, the what, the why, the how, we can write a high quality abstract will be put to use. The conference comes up in Lagos from 16th to 19th, even this year. And we will expect that our submissions will be in the area of quantitative abstract, qualitative abstract, or a combination of both. There's going to be a literature review, a systematic review, you know, will be preferable. Then in addition to that, we'll be up to also learn how we can write project-based abstract next week. So project-based abstract is also allowed. Again, quantitative, qualitative, a combination of both, or systematic review, and then in addition to that, project-based abstract. So we look forward even to having your abstract submitted. Call for abstract is out already, and it's going to be closing by May 31st. And so we want us to please utilize this opportunity to be able to put our work together, even for submission. It's going to be a great time in Lagos, even come in August. At this point in time, I would like to appreciate everyone that has made today a great day. The erudite presenters, Professor Olade Wright again, and Professor Olumide, Adeshola Olumide. Thank you very much, even for putting everything to really give us the best this afternoon. It's been very, very enlightening. And let me also appreciate our facilitators, Dr. Adeyemi and then Oladimeji Ibrahim. Great job. Thank you very much. Then to our webinar attendees, this has been very awesome. You're coming. We appreciate your attention. We appreciate and the thought-provoking questions. They are really, really great. Thank you very much. And may I end by saying that next week is another day. Project-based abstracts, we are already again, same, Thursday, same time, 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And I think that we're going to be able to have more than the number today. The attendance, is quite more than 100. And so I'm sure that we are aware of that. It's not just 100 people that attended. Once again, thank you, everyone. See you next week. Thank you. Bye. Over.
All right, thank you so much, sir. Before we all go, may I request that we just put on our video, if you're okay with that, so that we can take a screenshot of our beautiful and handsome faces. So if you can put on your camera. Yes, okay, thank you, Adenike. Yeah, I can see all those handsome, beautiful faces. All right, so let me just take the first one.